Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I'm back in the swing of things. After 2 weeks of positive COVID tests, I finally came up negative last Friday, and well, I've never been so happy to be negative, I guess. I feel like I'm on the mend, albeit with some ongoing, we'll say, mental cloudiness and fatigue. But that said, I can fake it with the best of them. So I hope you don't notice a drop in my performance outside of the occasional coughing, which did make this week's show a little tricky. But you'll cut me some slack. So, it's my birthday this week. Not any sort of special round number or, I have now outlived everyone in my family or anything like that. Just a regular old birthday. So, in lieu of presents, just, tell other people about the podcast and get me the massive audience I clearly do not deserve after all these years. But, another orbit is, it is something. Sorry, it is something to celebrate. Darn this COVID. So yay me. But you guys have heard me gab way too much in the past few weeks with the guest list a couple of weeks ago and the interview of me last week. And let's get to the show. Now, my guest this time is Sara Lippmann, who has a wonderful new novel out now called Lech from Tortoise Books. It's Lech. Lech is it's a polyphonic novel. I think Sarah uses that term in the conversation. She uses a close third-person narrative with 5 different characters, and the chapters are named, for whoever's doing the one-person removed narration. And it's set in this deteriorating Catskills community. It was once home to the Borscht Belt of Jewish resorts, but it's taking place in 2014, long after those glory days when everything is pretty much fallen apart. And she does a remarkable job of bringing the characters and the setting to life. Among the narrators, she bounces among a local and her daughter who are both trying to scrape by in different ways. A lapsed member of the nearby Hasidic community, an aging boomer who rents out his home to upscale visitors from New York, but doesn't actually leave. He stays nearby and kind of watches them. And one of those upscale visitors who is questioning her life and her recent abortion. This stuff all comes up very early on in the book itself, so I'm not giving anything away. But ostensibly, at the core of the book is a murder or a death that happens long before the book itself begins. But as Sarah talks about, that's sort of secondary in the novel, even though it's sort of the engine. What the book is about is more about the living and what they make of their circumstances and the ways that trauma, large and small, reverberates through our lives and how we try to overcome it, I suppose. Now, I should note, on top of, character and setting and how evocative that all is, the prose in this book is just wonderful. As we talk about, this book took Sarah a long time, and I didn't ask, but I think part of that is reflected in just how well wrought it is. Her sentences are just beautifully constructed, and there's so many evocative images and turns of phrase that occur throughout it. And her grasp of her characters and their lives and the ways they talk to each other and the mistakes they can't help but make, it's all reflected through this beautiful writing, and it really leads to a fantastic and enjoyable novel. So I'm awfully glad to kick off 2023 proper with a book like Lech and a conversation with Sara. Now, she was on the show in 2014, and we've stayed in touch occasionally over the years, especially once I took up running, because she did that within a year or two of our recording back then. I'll note that while I said last week in my insane and dragged out overlong introduction that I'm hoping to have fewer return guests and more newbies in the months ahead, it turns out I had no idea what I was talking about. All that matters is bringing you a great conversation, and I think that's what we do this week. Now, as caveats go, we recorded in person at her sister's home in the Upper West Side, some ambient New York City noise, but really not that much. The writer she is trying to remember who reads the Saul Bellow story for the New Yorker podcast is Camille Bordas, and the Courtney Sender short story collection coming out in March 2023 is In Other Lifetimes, All I've Lost Comes Back to Me, from West Virginia University Press. She knew the book. She just didn't even want to risk screwing up the title, so you'll hear it all in a few minutes. Now, here's Sara's bio. Sara Lippmann is the author of the short story collections Doll Palace, released by 713 Books, and Jerks from Mason Jar Press. Her work has been honored by the New York Foundation for the Arts and has appeared in The Millions, The Washington Post, Best Small Fictions, Epiphany, Split Lip, and elsewhere. She teaches with Jericho Writers and lives with her family in Brooklyn. Her new novel is Lech. And now, the 2023 Virtual Memories conversation with Sara Lippmann. So tell me about the novel, because when we talked in 2014, it was, you mildly described it because you didn't want to go too far, too far in. Sorry for all the coughing, but COVID. And what the novel that you wrote, is not necessarily the one you were describing in 2014. So tell me about this and tell me how it changed.
Oh, it's interesting. I really wonder what I said all those years ago.
Can you love a monster?
Can you love a monster?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I listened to it on the drive-in just now, and I thought, I wonder. But anyway, go on.
Okay, so... so the book originated with just, with the title character, Ira Letcher, who was, I guess in its earliest sense, much more, of an insidious, insidious character perhaps than he's, hopefully, I think I've had a large emotional shift in those 9 years or however long it's been. But it's really interesting. Gosh, well, that would be a whole therapy session for us.
I'm here. We only have 50 minutes, but I'm here for you.
So the novel itself is revolves around the potential sale of a property in the Catskills over the summer of 2014, which I put forth sort of as a very sort of thin conceit for deeper interrogation of this idea from Genesis of Lech Lecha, which is how to go forth, how to build a life, freeing yourself, or at least learning how to shoulder some of the things that we carry. So it's interesting to think about that being sort of the driving imperative in relation to what I had said before about can you love a monster? Because I think actually of all the, it's told from 5 different points of view. The characters themselves they're monsters to themselves. So a lot of it is about learning to accept or at least love oneself before we can love another, and also to free ourselves from the various, all 5 of the characters come with their own level of shit and baggage, including the property itself around which they revolve. So a lot of it is sort of learning to, again, if not embrace, become comfortable with sort of all of that darkness and integrate it in a way that it becomes perhaps more nourishing, or that we can move through it.
So it became a question of, can a monster love itself?
Perhaps. It's like, it's funny because, speaking of monsters, again, I'm going off on a tangent already, but
that's what we do.
There is, I don't know if you're familiar with, the classic book, the classic Sesame Street book called There's a Monster at the End of This Book.
Heck yeah.
Okay. So, featuring our lovable pal Grover, which has been sort of a beacon for me and a rather rich metaphor for me when in writing a novel, because I consider myself a short story writer. So I've had a lot of baggage just with the idea of writing a novel and why it took me so long, and partly why it took me so long. If you're familiar with the book, Grover is afraid of what he will confront if he finishes this book, right? And then ultimately, what he confronts is himself, and the monster is the self. And so, and I think that's partly why I got stuck in that murky middle of the novel for a long time, is that I was, to move through it and all of its attendant fears and neuroses and so forth, it took a long time. But, that's part of the evolution, right?
So tell me how it differed from short story writing for you.
Well, for me, a lot of it, again, is on two levels. So on the one hand, I consider myself a short story writer in the sense that I think everybody has a sort of narrative sweet spot that feels sort of comfortable to them, and in how they conceive of story, how they conceive of narrative. Obviously some are playwrights, some are poets, and what have you. I tend to feel comfortable in a short story between 2,500 and 3,500 words. That's just sort of where, I naturally kind of fall. On the flip side of that, I think the danger is to become sort of complacent with what our comfort level is. And so part of the challenge for me for writing the novel on a real craft level was to sort of stretch myself beyond that. Could I sustain a narrative over time, and to kind of get comfortable with the sort of discomfort of being outside of, say, my league, so to speak. So there was that. There was also the real practical concerns of the fact that I originated, I started out with short stories and flash just because that was the way my life dictated. Sort of my life dictated the form. I didn't have that much time to devote to writing. Not that I have that much more time now. I actually think I have less time. But so it became sort of a training, to kind of sit with that, to realize that I'm not going to see the end for a long time, which again is scary. And then actually, but I will confess that, one of my girlfriends, who's actually a wonderful writer and editor and poet and songwriter, when she read one of my early drafts of the book, and she had said to me, she diagnosed this novel as saying it suffers from storyitis. So meaning that I had a tendency to sideline a lot of the dramatic action sort of off the page. Yeah. And so, which tends to be sort of what I do with story writing, is that like...
You only have so much space.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot that can be done emotionally just through implication without sort of leaning into that dramatic action. And so, again, that was something that I had to work on, actually putting... it sounds really stupid, but putting drama on the page and kind of leaning into that unfolding. So, so that was something that I had to learn. But, at the same time, it's told from 5 different points of view. So I was able to kind of use some of that, the story writer skills,
the elusiveness,
the elusiveness, and to kind of let myself shift in point of view if I felt a sense of stasis, and sort of to just kind of keep going and keep moving, even though not that much happens in the book. Spoiler.
There's a mystery.
Yeah.
Although you do have a passage about the mystery being the setup, or the setup being the hook, that there is a mystery, but it's not important to know what happened.
Right.
It's more about the fallout, I suppose, and what people's lives are like after,
Yeah, it's about like sort of the proximity, the way that we inherit There's a tragedy and our proximity to tragedy. And then also there's something midrashic about it, in the sense that you have, there's an event that happens, and what's really interesting is not exactly what happened, but the various interpretations of what happened and how everybody, it kind of takes on this event, this drowning that has taken place on the property in question almost 25 years prior to the beginning of the book, has this sort of mythological quality where, it's echoing through the lives of the various people and through the town, but it's a matter of what threads they're pulling out of it, right? Like what happened in that moment with the woman who drowned in the lake exactly, that becomes less of the, it's not a who did it and why necessarily, right? It's what you take from that. And so that idea is really interesting to me, that there's never going to be sort of...
It's an eclipse.
Right.
It's the occlusion of something, and it's the halo of it that we all reflect and see. Not that I want to give you a new image for your book.
But absolutely. And so that's really what was, interesting to me. And so just again, as an aside, and I mean, she's probably not listening, but at one point my agent really wanted me to dial up the mystery, dial up that event, push that to the foreground. And so again, this is partly, real talk, why this novel took me so long, but I was really resistant to that because to me, that's not the point. I wasn't telling that story, right? It was all the stuff after.
So what else did you have to learn in terms of both about the writing and just structuring something long, but also, finding the different voices in which you're writing? Mm-hmm. What did that do for, and again, this looks like it's part of why it took a long time to build.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did a lot of research. I mean, I the book is set in the Catskills, which is actually a region that I did not grow up being familiar with. And there was a lot of trepidation and that was one of the more challenging factors. I mean, most of my short stories in both of my collections are, and I think I probably said this on your show all those years ago, was that I had the setting. Like the setting was a sense of anchor, the one thing that I kind of knew inside and out. Whereas, the Borscht Belt, the Catskills, these were, obviously they were part of sort of culturally a place that I was familiar with, but I really needed to do some significant research. So there was that. And, and then obviously, challenge of, who are you and what right do you have to tell these various people's stories, I think also was something that I grappled with. And, there are some characters that are closer to me. A lot of the characters in this book are quite far from me. So for example, it's Tzvi, the Hasidic drug dealer in the book, had always been in the book, but he did not have a close third. He didn't have his own sections until the 11th hour. And I knew I needed to go there, and I was quite worried about going there. And so that was a whole process of, making sure that if I was going to, give him that close third POV, that I was doing it thoughtfully and with enough research and measure behind me that I could hopefully at least try to capture his sensibility.
Without demonstrating too much resentment towards the Hasidic community?
Well, no, but also not like appropriating, like, who am I, right? Who am I? Obviously, like what right, it goes to this, this question that's being bandied about all the time, who gets to tell what story?
Sure. And it's it's an ongoing issue. It's something I brought up recently with a pal. We were talking about a live show I did a bunch of years ago. I always say a couple of years ago, but everything is a long time now. With a German author who did a book about Hitler waking up in modern day Germany, not knowing what happened and trying to make his way, and ends up, everybody thinks he's a Hitler impersonator. He doesn't realize that everybody's laughing, and he ends up starting a popular movement by accident. And we did this live event at the Goethe Institute with a couple of, with him and two Jewish Holocaust-related scholars and translators. And it was late in the panel discussion when I said, well, we're all Jews here, so, making fun of Hitler is one thing. And the author himself said, oh, actually, I'm not Jewish. And that suddenly changed the entire vibe. Like, it's one thing to make fun of Hitler when you're a Jew. Mm-hmm. Another thing when you're not one of the, ethnic groups that was targeted, and it was one of the few times I've had I'm not sure it's cool now. And generally, I believe in the imaginative force, and we should be able to write whatever voices and ethnicities or whatever as best we can to try to really understand them. But that was one of my moments of, geez, right. I don't know,
Right. Well, it's like that film. I mean, this gets, right. Are we capitalizing from that? I mean, this is the controversy around what's that Italian film, Life is Beautiful, Yeah. Right. I mean, so yes, I mean, it's completely fraud. And it makes me think about, actually, I don't know if you've read this book, but I feel like you would love it. And I also feel like you would enjoy talking with him. He's a great podcast guest as well, though you would have to do it remotely because he lives in California. But Jerry Stahl, do you know Jerry Stahl?
I know of him, but I never read his stuff.
Okay, so Jerry Stahl was, big writer, and his memoir Permanent Midnight about his heroin addiction became a movie with Ben Stiller. He was, big writer. He's written a ton of books, but his most recent memoir called 999, which is German, no, is about his. He did this sort of trip to all of the concentration camps. Mm-hmm. And he was on a bus with basically, I mean, there were honeymooners on this bus. There were, I think he was there was maybe one other Jewish man on the bus, but there were all these people that were on this tour led by tour guides. Yeah. And it is so dark. I mean, also quite funny, so dark, so revealing about humanity, and disturbing, but brilliant. And I think such an urgent story because it is just what you're dialing into, right? Of what sort of the commodification of the Holocaust, which is, again, this is something that, people far more erudite than I am are talking about. But
I mean, in this case, the novel was hysterically funny, but I wasn't sure if it was as funny once I had wait, that guy's not Jewish?
Right.
That's a little weird now. I still laughed, but yeah, I'm torn. Right? It's called Look Who's Back. It got made into a movie. Okay. I think they did an Italian spin-off too with Mussolini suddenly waking up too.
Who's the author?
Timur Vermis.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was... Again, it was one of the few times, especially during a live show, I've had that, boy, I'm not sure I feel the same way about this book that I felt 2 seconds ago. And I segged everything into, a Mel Brooks reference and was able to keep the conversation going from there. But for you, adopting a Hasidic, sort of lapsed Hasidic perspective.
Yeah, sort of lapsed Hasidic,
he's still part of the community, but he's trying to leave the fold. He's trying to escape the fold. He's, questioning his sexuality, not only questioning his sexuality, he's quite aware of, that his sexuality is that he is a queer young man and that he's been sort of put into this box by his religion. And again, it's the same theme of like trying to break free of the ties that bind and try to live one's own life. We're given one. Yeah. And so, that's what he's facing. So again, I mean, I don't know if I did it. I mean, I did have people who are in the fold read it, just sort of as a sensitivity scan afterward. And who knows, I hope I did an okay job. But I'm sure I got things wrong. But it's certainly the most, I'll say, alien perspective of the five majors, because it really is a mentality that's rooted, much earlier in someone's development and sort of colors the entire way one sees the world. Mm-hmm. In a way that I agree, could be very tough to get across without, either being patronizing, missing the point completely, or no, everybody is just the same, and realizing that, we're not all the same in terms of, how we came up and what we're led to believe and what we discover about the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the other characters are carrying their trauma too. So it's not like he's the one who's...
no, they are too. They are too. It's interesting. I mean, I'm just sharing this with you because his point of view came in last, but in many ways it's the most vital of the notes. His mother, who had drowned in the lake, and so he's sort of born into he's not born into it. He was a young boy at the time. But he's carrying this grief. His mother died on Tisha B'Av, which is considered, it's considered the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. It's the day the temples were destroyed, both of them, many years apart. And you read from the Book of Lamentations on the night before Tisha B'Av, and there's a certain trope or a certain cadence that of the liturgy that's really quite elegiac. And so, just like eventually, the way I got into his point of view was just trying to have his voice approximate that elegy, that sort of cadence. So it's definitely sort of the most fragmented, most like Flash, and most perhaps musical of the other voices.
You do a great job.
Thank you.
I enjoy the heck out of the novel. So, although it does raise the question for me, you've taught novel writing before finishing a novel?
I taught novel writing when it was in production.
Okay, so you felt like you were somewhat qualified? Or
well, no. I mean, the one thing I
completely?
tell my students is I'm a cautionary tale. I was teaching it was a ultimate novel writing course. The students were supposed to write a book in a year. Of course, it took me like 8 years, and so I thought that they were heroic just for attempting that. But of course, part of what I said was, you might finish a draft in a year, but your book probably is not going to be ready at the end of this, ready for prime time at the end of our 9 months together or what have you. And I think that's actually a healthy thing. I mean, and I think sometimes our failures can be instructive to others, right? And so I certainly wish, not that I wish that I had been taking a course necessarily, but I wish that there was someone that I felt like I could really talk to through this process. I felt quite alone. I will say a lot of writers, particularly successful writers, it's hard for people to, they write these beautiful books and they don't necessarily, all the hems have been tied up and they don't necessarily reveal all the, the hanging threads, in process. And so I think it's really healthy to air all of that. So I'm, particularly again, when I started this course, it's September, everybody's, there's the romance period when you're in love with your story and everything's moving and flowing and then things, March is that murky middle and everybody's, a lot of my students are starting to have doubts and feel stuck and all of that. And I think, I don't know, I don't want to toot my own horn, say I was some fantastic writer, but some fantastic teacher, but at least to normalize that emotion of being, of saying to them, oh, you're feeling like you might be floundering in that middle.
Welcome to writing.
Yes, you're writing a novel. That's exactly where you're supposed to be right now, and that's okay. And so, instead of being resistant to that emotion, to embrace it.
It reminds me, when you mentioned the threads being loose, the old Paris Review Writers at Work interviews, where they would always have a page of manuscript of the authors at the beginning, and you see just how much, is written over the typescript on the page.
Right.
There's an awful lot that goes into what we end up seeing as the absolute finished product.
Completely.
Although even then, some people, well, I used to publish Samuel Delaney, who used to live a few blocks from here, science fiction writer and essayist. And, he would just send changes and edits constantly to things we'd already printed, like chapbooks and other stuff. He just, change the sentence and move this here. And I'm like, Chip, we kind of, I've already said this is done and we've mailed it out to people. It's no, just put in another letter saying it's a different edition. I'm like, yeah. So,
oh yeah. If I didn't bring my copy to show you, but I've been doing a fair amount of readings from the book and it's all, I can't read a passage without editing so I think that's a living thing though. That's probably human nature, or at least my human nature.
How much do you read aloud when you're writing?
All of it.
Yeah.
That's really important to me, particularly at the end. I think there's a danger to reading it too early because it becomes.
Are you doing it in stages, or do you sort of let it accrete?
No, I do. I let it accrue. I don't. I think that as someone who tends to write a lot of flash and short fiction, I have done a lot of reading out loud of the work before sending things out, and I believe in that stage. But again, being more comfortable with letting those pages accrue over time, because otherwise there's a certain level of preciousness that happens when you're reading out loud. I mean, obviously you're checking for things, but you're also listening for the musicality and so forth, and so, I tried to, with this project, resist reading it out loud until those final edit stages.
Yesterday, I had to do a 20-minute presentation on, the standard topic I give for my weird little pharmaceutical world, and had to script the entire thing out first, pre-recording it so they can play it Monday at this big investor conference. And with the COVID thing, I found that I had to read the sentences aloud to figure out which ones had sentences too long and were going to make me cough, and figure out how to fix the language so that when I actually recorded, I wasn't going to have too many of these breaks where I'm suddenly turning off camera and coughing away. Somehow it all worked out. And the only problem was it came in at 24 minutes, and I just basically just tell the video processing program, just make this 20, keep the pitch the same, and I'm talking 15% faster than I was, 20% faster than I was before, which is pretty frightening. I don't know what they're going to make of it on Monday, but it's out of my hands.
No, but you're a pro. I mean, my brother-in-law just now, in meeting you for 2 seconds, said, "Oh, he's got a very good voice."
That's the thing I can always get by on. Even when I get wrecked by
whatever. The winning voice. It's,
and the COVID helps. I find it deepens things a little for me, but. Second novel, or are you going to fall back into fiction? Short fiction?
No, I'm working on a novel. I am working on a novel right now. It's set in Philadelphia, my hometown. It's one point of view, 2 timelines. Half of the story takes place in the 80s and 90s, and also heavily featuring trauma, both public and private trauma. And then the current storyline takes place in 2008.
Okay, but I'm coming back in 8 years. And if this is not the same book, I'm going to be very mad, just like...
Oh, me too. No, I mean, I hope to God that it's done in the next 6 months, or at least a draft is done in the next 6 months.
Does it feel easier? Not because of, the mechanics or et cetera, but having one under your belt, do you now feel okay, I know what I'm doing-ish?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there were a lot of pitfalls. The first draft of the novel of Lech was, I think, 106,000 words, and it published at like 73 or 74. So there was a huge amount of cutting, compression that took place. So now I'm just trying to write short. So so that's a huge thing, is that it's right now 55,000 words, the book, and I see this project capping at 65, 70. So I do feel like, okay, yes, there might be a lot of revision, but I don't have to give it gastric bypass surgery, right? Yeah.
It's not a gut and rebuild.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, you're feeling it. And I mean, are you in love with the longer form? Or is it just I've got stories to tell that just don't fit my old
that's such a good question, because I have, I'm excited / nervous about this story because it's got some really difficult trauma that might be somewhat controversial. There's also a historical event in it, which I've never really done, so I have to deal with that. But for whatever reason, again, it goes back to this question of how do you know how do you know the container for your story? And for whatever reason, why this one feels also novelistic, and then I don't know, after that, I don't know what's next after this project. So I'm letting myself be open.
See, the funny thing with the container thing, because as you know, I'm an absolute failure of a writer.
That's not true.
Yeah, but really. Postcards. See, I do that postcard a day thing. Mm-hmm. At least once a week, I will have this ingenious idea for a story or something. All I do is just write it in a postcard and send it to someone and never bother looking at it again. Just did it yesterday. I had this moment a couple of nights ago, 2 nights ago, 3 a.m. I wake up and I think to myself, what if all along this podcast hasn't been what I thought it was, and it's actually a true crime podcast, and I just didn't realize it. And all of you guests know something about some murder or series of murders, and I just never thought to ask the right questions. And it turns out everybody is connected like this. And I thought, that's ingenious. Never going to do anything with it. Let me write on a postcard and send it to somebody in Germany. And just it left me. It's out in the world now. Unfortunately, it's here on tape too. But yeah, it's
well, funny you should ask, Gil.
See, that's what I'm convinced. Because
as a child, my neighbor murdered his wife.
There's always
drowned
good
her in the
murders
bathtub.
around. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is it something you?
I think I might have alluded to it in a story once. He did. He murdered his wife, drowned her in the bathtub for the insurance money, and he's in prison somewhere in Philadelphia. Yeah.
I haven't read your second story collection, which I feel bad about.
Okay.
Yeah. But
so I think it might be. I think there might be a line of it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
A Jewish man, no less. My father always would speak.
So we have with us, we have the term of Jewish lightning. So there is a crime thing in our ethnic history. That's
that's really funny.
But knowing the container.
Yeah. But back to the container and back to postcard fiction. This is interesting too, because as a teacher of Flash and short form, this is one of my classic prompts. One of my favorite prompts is to have students write a story on a postcard, or in lieu of a postcard, rather an index card.
Yeah, no, literally, just postcards.
Yeah.
I just mail them out to people.
Well,
I don't even take a picture. I don't care. It's out in the world. People write to me, "Oh, I got that great postcard." I don't even remember sending it. Send one every day, and I'm glad you got something. Do they take
pictures of it?
Some people do. They'll send a picture of the postcard. Sometimes it's just the front. They'll post it online with, "Oh, got a wonderful postcard from a friend." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I must have sent that last week." Yeah, it's just great for me, having no memory whatsoever. Once it's written and in the mailbox, I
love that. And there's something very punk rock and sort of zine-ish about that as well.
Yeah, I do have to do the second issue of my zine, too, at some point. I think I sent you the first one. I can't remember. It had been
many years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got to get over myself and finish 2 little pieces. And
what's cool about it, though, too, is this, everything is temporary.
Oh, yeah. No,
right?
no, I've learned that really well.
Everything is ephemeral. No, but everything is, I think that's what's, forgive me, but this sort of mocking of a podcast, or the seriousness of as if anybody would really give a shit about my work or my process, because it is all, there is no, sometimes I see these things on Twitter where some writer is earnestly pondering,
their place
whether they're their lasting present, and it's give me forgive me, but give me a fucking break, we are a speck of dust. We are gone in a second, and we might as well have fun, right?
The big question of your influences.
Yeah.
Because we've talked a little about it in the past, and I saw an interview with you recently discussing, especially why Lech is named Lech, part of the double meaning.
Yeah.
I was watching the PBS documentary on Bello a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, I haven't seen it.
It's real interesting, partly because monumentally important figure, no one reads him.
Yeah, no one reads him anymore.
Yeah. And you get these Amos and Rushdie and Roth before his death, on screen talking about the absolute pivotal importance, etc. And then you look at it Roth himself is gone, and a lot of his literary reputation's also taken a beating in recent years. The upshot of the book is the documentary is there are 2 segments with Charles Johnson and Vivian Gornick, where after all the hero worship, they come in with but let's actually look at the prose here and keep in mind some of the big blind spots in Bello's worldview.
Oh, yeah.
They puncture a bunch of the heroism that's conveyed. It's very, in that respect, it's interesting because early on it becomes too lionizing in a sense. But yeah, talk a little about your I guess that sense of those writers and the influence they had on you and what you're doing.
Yeah,
with
well,
Lech.
for sure. So Bello, it's God. This is such a. I'm having such a senior moment right now, and I'm tempted to go fact check myself with my phone. Although, speaking of Bello and obscurity, on the New Yorker Fiction podcast, I forget who it was, but someone recently selected a Bello story to read, and I was sort of floored by it, and it also felt quite dated. And now I'm wondering who was the writer who chose it, and what I
Steingart or somebody.
No, I feel like it was I want to say it was a female writer. But
I'll put it in the notes afterwards.
Okay. But I'll figure it out. I got to look that up. And anyway, I mean, Bellow, yeah, sure. Early exposure to Bellow, Augie March, Seize the Day, but really, like, what an asshole Herzog was, right? And so there's obviously, you know, a response to that, you know, also a novel that's one name, last name, you know, there's obviously a nod there. And Roth. I mean, like, yes, so I grew up, you know, I grew up reading a lot of male writers, a lot of Jewish male writers, although also a fair amount of Updike as well. And, you know, there's sort of that, there's sort of that direct engagement with this book, this book as sort of a response to it. And I feel like these writers that obviously have been very important to me, and it would be disingenuous for me to say, like, they haven't been deeply influential. I mean, Roth's short story collection, Goodbye Columbus, I mean, the novella and those stories, I think I've talked about this, if not with you, but with other people, you know, was really sort of a seminal text for me as a young person of like 14, you know, and wanting to tell.
It's always funny when you use
stories.
Roth and seminal at the same time.
Sorry.
No, I love it.
I mean, right? I mean, but there you go. You know, and so obviously these books, you know, Portnoy, right? I mean, but really it was Sabbath Theater. I feel like
it's very funny because people say they cannot finish it because they find it too much of everything. And to me, I think it's the seed for, again, the seminal work for everything that Roth does after, from 95 onwards, the America trilogy, everything comes out of Sabbath.
Yeah. I love Sabbath. I mean,
yeah.
I you know.
It is too much, but it's
like,
yeah.
I like, you know, let your freak flag fly, man. And I just think it's so rich and so beautiful and funny and I just love that book. I really do. And so, yeah, so I mean, for as complicated as my relationship might be with Roth, not you, Roth, but
yes.
Roth.
But me too. It's okay.
But I think that friction is interesting. Yeah. You know, like I think it's interesting when we talk about influence. You know, influence doesn't have to be necessarily, you know, the writers that you most admire. Of course, you know, I do have great admiration for these writers, but also who are, you know, I don't want to be, you know, problematic or fraught in a way that allows space for that sort of direct engagement and response. And so, yes, this is like sort of a feminist response in many ways to stuff that we see in the Ghostwriter and other places. And that was, you know, also we've talked about,
Bruce Friedman?
Well, Bruce Friedman,
yeah.
Right? Stern, right? Also, there's like sort of that, you know, there's sort of pathetic qualities of Ira here. Also, you know, our classic unlikability, non-Jewish writer, but David Gates, Jernigan, right? Like you have also, you know, another last name, you know, one name, sort of unlikable, somewhat hermit kind of guy, right? In the woods,
God's
right?
sake, Peter,
you know?
is there anything you can't fuck up? Yeah.
Okay, so like there is that, but I think that's, again, I mean, I keep coming back to this word of friction, of tension, but I think that gives us, I mean, I know my novel doesn't have perhaps great, you know, narrative, what's the word, verve necessary. I mean, hopefully it has some verve, but you know, it's not, again, a classic whodunit. It's not a thriller, but like those moments of tension, I think, for me, at least as a reader, are interesting. And as a writer, that was what kept me engaged.
Now, say, when you mentioned being through a feminist lens, do you find the women in Roth and Bellow real the way the men are?
So I don't want to say a blanket statement. I think that it depends on I think Bellow's are worse. I think Bellow's women are worse. I think Roth's women are, I mean, like, I love why can't I remember her name?
Amy Billette?
No, Sabbath's wife. I mean, Sabbath's, not Sabbath's wife, Drenka, right, yeah, Drenka. Not a wife. But like, I forget about, you know, like, I don't know. I mean, I think that she's got a lot on the page.
Yeah.
So, I think the party line, of Roth being, I mean, I'm sure, you know, classic misogynist, not understanding. I think that that's really reductive. I think that there are, you know, I don't want to say blind spots, but I think that there's, you know, there's limits to his access. There's limits to but it goes by book to book. And I think sometimes it's quite interesting what he's doing with women. So.
Pandemic writing? Did the book get done during pandemic? Or were you able to...
Pandemic, I got a puppy.
Yeah.
And so my puppy life took over.
Life.
Yeah, it took over my life. I realize now, as I'm lowering my voice, that I have a tendency to be. I probably have been screaming through this entire podcast. Forgive me.
It's okay. I've been checking the levels on the recorder.
Yeah. Well, this is again. I'm in my sister's house. I should disclose that I have actual legitimate hearing loss, and so that is something that has perhaps always been since adolescence because I went to too many concerts, but it's gotten much worse. I also grew up in a house of screamers. My parents yell at each other all day long. And so my sister and I, by default, I feel like all of us we just scream all the time. So
I'll turn this up to 11.
So pandemic writing was challenging for me, but the book was pretty much done. I mean, my agent shopped it, took it out on submission in summer of 2020. So it was pretty much done.
Gotcha.
At that point. I was doing more like book reviews and essays and stuff, but not a ton of. I haven't written a lot of fiction. I mean, I've been just basically editing for the past couple of years.
First show you went to?
First concert?
Yeah, you mentioned going to way too many concerts. I'll tell you my embarrassing one after you tell me your first.
My first. Chaperoned or unchaperoned?
Go chaperone first and then unchaperoned.
My first chaperone concert was to see Howard Jones at the Tower Theater. Do you remember Howard Jones?
Yeah, no,
okay.
I listened to First Wave.
Okay.
I'm serious.
Okay.
That's my. I'm 5 years old, 6 years older than you, so I've got the.
So I had to drag my mother to that because I think I was probably in like 5th grade at the time, and so she came with me to see Howard Jones at the Tower, which is a very small kind of intimate venue.
Saw Joe Jackson there.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. But I used to live down in Wallingford.
Okay.
So
you did?
media, that whole area, just for a year or so.
I think it's in Derby, right? Upper Derby, the Tower, right? I don't remember. Yeah, I mean,
sure.
And then first unchaperoned concert, 7th grade, the Kinks at the Mann Music Center.
Nice.
Yeah.
Those are good ones.
Yeah.
My first show was Asia.
Oh.
See, I always wait to throw that at people because, once you hear that, you really can't top that.
No, I think that's great.
1982, my mom's friend was their finance manager. So we had like 3rd or 4th row tickets and backstage passes. And I was 11 and saw Asia and smelled weed for the first time.
Yeah, too legit to quit. I like it.
It was Brendan Byrne back when they called it that at the Meadowlands. And I do not have a great story. I've post prog rock is my whole thing.
I love it. Oh, that's really funny. Yeah, we used to. I mean, this is something that I'm gonna really date myself in lamenting this, but I love and loved and still love, but I mean, my sister's still much more of a diehard than me, but I love going to see live music, and as a child and as an adolescent, like that's what I lived for. And it was wild. I mean, it's, obviously as a parent of teenagers now, my kids are all over the fucking place. I don't know where they are at any time, but I can usually like ping them on their phone. I can usually like find them or track them. My parents would drop me off at the Mann Music Center or on a street corner outside, and then it would say, I'll pick you up at this spot at 12:30 at the tree.
Right. There's things that we look at now. And again, I'm not a parent, so I'm cool with the way we were brought up.
Yeah.
But I have the suspicion that most of you guys are, if it weren't for the social pressure of every other parent looking down on you, you would be fine with, fuck it. Let the kids go do their thing and then,
Oh, I do. I mean, I do. I do. Yeah. I mean, my kids stay out way later at 15 and 17 than I was allowed to. I mean, I think part of this is because we were in the suburbs and there were kids that were driving and definitely driving under the influence.
And we had some of the parents who were doing that too. Like one of the housewives who was driving us to soccer practice and everything turned out to be Chica the entire time.
Yeah.
And so we all discovered that much later because we were 12, 13 years old and didn't realize what that meant. So, but anyway, go on.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's miraculous. I think about this. It's going to be so. I mean, it's miraculous that
we survived.
We survived. I mean, I have friends who drove into the fronts of houses like on mushrooms, and there was a friend, and I love you, Melissa, and she was our preferred drunk driver.
Yeah.
Like we could all like Melissa, I love her, but like Melissa knew how to drive drunk. I mean, isn't that amazing? And that was, we all wanted to be in her car because, and honestly, she got us where, she had this huge station wagon, from, the 70s and she just like, she would drive barefoot and, under God knows what. And that was how we got along. But yeah, no, my kids, and I was in the suburbs, and so here in the city, they're out till, 2 a.m, but they hang out, we had basements, they have parks, and that's where they are. So,
do they read your stuff?
My kids do not. They have no interest.
Okay.
Yeah, no interest.
Does it ever worry you that they will? We've talked about permission before. Like when we talked last time, it was more about your parents reading your stuff, which I'll also ask about. But
my parents read my stuff. My parents have been very supportive. My parents come to events, and my in-laws come to events. They've been very supportive too. My children have shown zero interest. My daughter's not a reader. My son is a very avid reader. Perhaps at some point he might become curious, but I doubt it. I think that like our kid, I don't know, at least my kids, they're so caught up in their own lives that they don't really they're not interested in their parents' lives, which is good and healthy and fine. But who knows, what'll happen. There's a wonderful line and, Meg Wolitzer. I don't know if you know Meg Wolitzer.
I've only read the one about the Nobel-winning husband.
Okay, The Wife, which is my favorite. It's probably my favorite novel of all time. It's flawless. But she has a novel called The Position, and it's about a couple. It's about a family, but the couple, I think that they're both sex therapists. And I think the opening scene of The Position is one of the children take down like their parents' sex textbook that they had written, from the shelf. And, it's that early moment of encounter of, oh my gosh, these, my parents wrote this and drew this and this is their lives, right? Which is, it's just really funny.
I'll point out when we talked in 2014, I went over the top with this joke, but it was true. I didn't read books by women for the most part. It was just a blind spot and something I just kept proliferating and again. So the fact that I have read Meg Wolitzer, I consider a personal achievement of my own. And I've done much more reading of women. I even gave you a book by a female author just now. What's changed for you? It's been 8.5, 9 years, besides taking up running.
Okay. Well, taking up running.
The big change of who you are. Yeah.
Okay. So so running. So first, I don't remember what we talked about in those years ago, but
not enough. It was only about a 40-minute conversation, and we really focus on the writing of your life as opposed to
all the other messy shit of my life.
It's more fun.
Okay. So it's no secret that I am a depressive, and sometime around age 40, I started running, and I attribute this largely to actually another podcaster who, you guys should be on each other's show. He's like a fantastic human being, writer, podcaster, Ben Tanzer, who's been is a lifelong runner and friend of mine. And I just sort of found his outlook. He's such a positive and warm person in his outlook. And he used to just post these images, and he has a small book, an ebook called, I want to say like 99 Things About Running that I read. Anyway, he inspired me to get my sneakers on at 40, which has been transformative. And for a whole host of reasons, which I can enumerate. But I think the other major evolution, so to speak, is the sort of fuck all sensibility that I've sort of embraced, which is, I think, probably happened somewhere around 45, 44, 45. I'm 47 and change now, but where I just, I just gave up all that bullshit, like all the stuff. All that, self-deprecate. It's not to say that I'm not still self-deprecating or full of doubt. I always will be. But this idea of like waiting for some gatekeeper to open the gate right? Some external validation, some, patriarchal daddy to be like, good job, whatever that, and it's a whole, again, we can make this a therapy session that we can, but I mean, for whatever reason why I had sort of bought into that construct, and it really was so suffocating for so long that I just kind of let all of that melt away. And so I don't know, I just feel like I'm living a much more sort of fully integrated life at the moment.
Was it a break, or was it something you noticed happening over time?
I think part of it was, again, I turned 45 right around the pandemic, and it was maybe before that. I think, I haven't talked about my collection Jerks, but the process of since meeting with you 9 years ago and now, I've been working on this novel, which was so difficult for me, particularly as a short story writer, that I wrote and published an entire book of short stories in between as sort of a cheat book. It was sort of the only thing, to kind of keep me going, which, my agent wouldn't send it out. So, fuck it, right? Fuck that whole system. And so thankfully I found a wonderful small press, Mason Jar Press, that put it out. And so, so that happened as another sort of beat in our time period. And I think that helped inform this sense of, again, this traditional the paradigm of traditional publishing, the sort of that elusive white whale. First of all, it's such a broken, it's so broken. Well. It's so false. And there's no reason why we need to subscribe to that as being the way, right? There's so many ways. And all we're doing, again, back to this whole idea of making art and sending it out to the world. All we're doing is telling stories and getting them out. And if one person on the other end is there to receive it and have an experience and have it shift them in some way or shift their temperature in some small way, then you've done your fucking job. And that's it. And so that's what's changed.
And coinciding with the pandemic, do you feel like there was a degree of the pandemic made it even more pronounced? Hey, I'm not out in the world, and I'm now looking, exactly where I am, or it just happened to coincide with. Well,
I think the pandemic made me realize how ridiculous I was being.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That moment of slowing down and
the moment of realizing that life is. Again, these are not profound realizations, but life is fleeting. And
again, it was a year later. I'm sitting there waiting for a cancer diagnosis and wondering what the fuck just happened, and then getting told it's no big deal, Gil. Right. You're going to be perfectly fine. I'm yeah, but I'm preparing for 6 months and out. Now I've got to go live for the rest of this.
Right. So it dials that urgency, right? It dials that sense of urgency. It dials that I am not what am I waiting for? What am I sitting back on? So I do think I had a big sort of emotional shift in my sensibility and outlook, which isn't, obviously the pandemic is horrific. And, but that is sort of a personal silver lining for me, is that it made me really realize how ridiculous of a human being I am.
No, it's something we've all known about you all this time, Sarah. So I'm glad you finally realized.
45 years to realize.
Give me a writing prompt.
Ooh.
You can do it at the very end if you want, but I decided you should give me something, and I will try and write over the next week or whatever.
So here's a writing prompt.
Okay.
And tell me a story tell me a story without mentioning the thing the story is about.
Okay.
Whether it's an event, a person, whatever it is, but you can't mention.
Okay, white elephant. Okay,
yes.
Good. So running.
Shall we talk about running?
Yeah. How did it change you? What did you learn? Because I'll tell you first, my thing was the initial sense of progress. Uh-huh. I had this 1.1 mile loop around the house, around the neighborhood with a lot of hills. There's a bunch of side streets and such you can run. But the very first time I didn't go more than half a mile before I had to conk out. And over time, farther and farther and quicker, but still always had to convince myself, next mailbox, next mailbox, next mailbox. It was once I started running with the old men about 4 months into it, almost a year into it, that I got over it. Once I started running with these guys and can't quit, we're still going. It's either 5 miles or 6 miles, depending on the loop they do. And after that, I stopped ever thinking about stopping. Like there's no, in the middle of a run, there's no longer I need to break into a walk. It simply became you run until you reach the point that we're supposed to be running to. So your experience and how that translates into your writing.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting. First of all, I want to break that. There's running alone and then there's running with another.
Running alone was the problem.
Yeah. So when I'm running with another person.
Actually, let me amend that. Yeah. Initially, running alone was the problem. Once the pandemic hit and I had to go back to running alone, I could do 15 miles without worrying about it because I had learned from running with the guys how to stop thinking about stopping. Yeah. So anyway, okay, you.
No, well, I mean, for me, I have a running partner, and yeah, I mean, I think running with someone is fantastic. I don't get out. I do 90% of my runs alone. And I think I ultimately prefer it because I do think it's actually more useful in terms of narrative and craft and writing, than running with someone. Because when I'm running with someone, again, this is nourishing the, emotional relationship, all of that part of myself. But, when I'm running with my friend, we're chatting, most of the time. And so it's a different type of running, whereas running solos can be much more meditative, for me, I'm listening to, 80s hair metal while I'm running. It's not like
I can't have any music or anything. I run outdoors, so I can't have any.
You can't have music?
No.
So that's aspirational. You're like the monk of running. Like I will never have. I'm not that focused. I have a friend. I wouldn't call him a friend, but a dog dad, a dog friend, and he runs with his dog, and he just did a marathon. But he said to me, he's like, "Oh, I can't run. I just run and I count my paces." And I thought, like, "Whoa! Like, there's no way. I need loud." I need loud, cheesy music in my ears.
If I'm doing treadmill, then yes. But if I'm out running on the roads, no music. But
treadmill, I need like the Sex Lives of College Girls. I need like really junky television.
Emily Nussbaum once called it the College Lives of Sex Girls, and I always have that stuck in my head ever since. Especially with the new wave song, "Are You Ready for the Sex Girls?" Anyway,
so running for me again. I think this is running and writing, it's such a link for me. I mean, this is...
Are you literally thinking of work while you're out running?
No. Okay. But the metaphor, I'm saying all these analogies of endurance and stamina and getting comfortable with discomfort and, doing
pissing
those
blood.
hills.
There's always a pissing blood.
All the, pissing blood, right? Like feeling like you want to quit. And I mean, just all of that, this sort of constant confrontation with, humility. Yeah. Right. And sort of the, both the limits and betrayals of the body and the ways that our body ultimately, does sustain us and can do these wonderful things. And then just having incredible gratitude for the fact that I'm able to put on my sneakers and go for a run. There is the banality of repetition of just going around and around in circles though too, that I think is interesting in some ways, although it does make me restless. But yeah, I mean, when I first started, it was, I always contending with various injuries, which thankfully, thanks to the Church of Hot Yoga, my injuries are right now, somewhat under control. But I do think, it's interesting. Many years ago in graduate school, I interviewed all these writers about their processes, whatever, that, for this literary journal. And people say various things. Obviously, Grace Paley, famously, who I did not interview, said of her process, I write in the bath. I write in the bathtub. Of course, she's not actually, maybe she is taking a pen and paper. Well, maybe she was in the bath. But this idea of where,
it happens.
Where it happens. And I think it was Justin Cronin who, I only actually read his novel, Mary and O'Neill, which I don't know if you've read. It's gorgeous. He's now he's very, very famous for, I think he writes thrillers. I think that's what his genre is now. But he wrote one one literary novel, I think just one, I could be wrong, that I think won the Penn Hemingway Award. And it's called Marianne O'Neill's Beautiful, It's Quiet. And I interviewed him right after he published that. And he said that he writes when he runs, which then I was 25. I didn't understand that because I was not running at all. But I do think that so much of our work happens away from the page. So much of our writing. And then this is something, of course, that I'm sorry if I'm rambling, something that I tell my students all the time when they talk about limitations and not writing and get on themselves for not writing. And I feel like it's all the writing happens in the space around the work. The actual time, at least for me, the actual time that I'm sitting down either with pen and paper or facing a screen is so limited, but it's that whatever we can do to sort of trick ourselves to get out of our own way, to unlock that sort of creative juice. And so I do think that running, I'm going to send you, I do have a running story in Jerks that maybe you will get a kick out of. It's kind of surreal. It's not kind of surreal. It is surreal. But yeah, it's been profound. And then of course the effects afterwards is that it's helped. It's been the best antidepressant that I know. So I'm not a mental health expert. I obviously believe in antidepressants, but this has been the most powerful and sustaining for me.
Longest run?
Longest run is
marathon?
Half marathon. No, okay. Half marathon.
Because if I do get back to it and get into decent shape, I can drag you out to the Gilroth Invitational. Mm-hmm. In my town, there are these 3 major lakes that the town is built around, and it's a shit ton of hills that will kill you. But I've got a route that is exactly 13.3 around the lake closest to my house, then the next, and finally back where you're just a shattered wreck of a human being. So yeah, maybe that's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Some reason for me to get back to trying to actually
let's do it.
We'll do walking breaks every mile.
Yeah,
and
let's do it. Well, I think that's also part of it is that, taking breaks, bringing fuel. I don't know if you're a fuel person. I'm a fuel person.
The little gels. I actually have one in the bag here because I may get stuck somewhere and need the sugar and caffeine and just, yeah.
So absolutely. Let's do it.
Yeah. 20.21 is
that's your longest?
Yeah. And with about 2,000 feet of, about 2,000 feet of hills ultimately. It was the end of 2020. I decided to do my town and keep it all within 3 miles of my house. So I figured out this crazy circuitous route. The idea being I wanted to stay close to the house in case my body broke, which it did. But, I managed to keep going after that. Didn't run well for a while after, but still finished 2020 by going 20.21 and thought that was going to push. So you have a marathon.
You have to do a marathon.
That's what the old men said after I finished. Like, Gil, 20 miles with 2,000 feet of elevation is like 26 miles on a flat course. Go to Chicago and go run that. Yeah. Luckily, I going downhill around 16 or 17 screwed up something.
Oh, no.
But that's been 2 years and it'll fix itself, right?
Of course.
Because as we get older, these things just take care of themselves.
Of course it does. I don't know that I'll ever run a marathon. I mean, I've been thinking about it, and it would be Chicago. I do think Chicago is.
I've heard such great stuff.
I mean,
because of the flatness, but also my friends who have run it have said, and have run others, say it's the most supportive. They said there will be people every mile cheering you. We're in New York.
Yeah.
There are stretches you're just like, is this an abandoned wasteland? I didn't know this was still here. And you don't feel it quite as much. I said Chicago, you will feel supported the entire time. People will be cheering all 26 miles for you. So.
That's the one. I was in Chicago, my publisher is based in Chicago, and so I was in Chicago in October and went out in the morning and I think I ran 8.5. I went out to do 5 and I did almost 9 just because it's hard not to keep running in that town. I mean, it's just built for runners. So,
it always pisses me off because Levi Stahl, who was on the show, he works at University of Chicago Press, on Strava, he's much faster than me. He's been running all his life. But he will post these 8-mile runs on the lakeside, and you'll see the elevation changes 3 feet.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, you went 8 miles and you just didn't climb anything the entire time. But it's great. I had one at the, in Weehawken. I stayed at the the hotel right next to the ferry that brings you into the city, because I had a show at the Javits Center. This is a year or so ago, and ran morning before the show. I did a 6.5 or 7 miles down to Fort Lee and back. And when I checked my number, literally the elevation change was 4 feet over 6 miles. And I thought that was fine. I had a nice time. Everything's nice and stable. And, didn't get hit by a truck on the way back, which is important. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends what your goals are. And, for me, because I'm running purely for mental health.
Yeah.
Right. So I am running purely for mental health. So I don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize my body in a way that's going to then put me out of commission. Right. Because then I will be in a very dark place. So I have to just, and so I don't have these goals for pacing really. I don't have these goals. I just want to be grateful that I can go out there and do it regularly enough so that I, can make it through a dark winter. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think, on the other hand, the flip side of that is that stasis can set in when you don't have, when you don't have, this is human nature, you want to have yourself. Yeah. So we're doing, with this, my running partner, we got into the lottery for the, Manhattan half, which starts in Brooklyn I think we run over the Brooklyn Bridge. We run through Times Square, and then it ends up here by, in Central Park, which seems fun. Yeah. So that'll be.
And again, a half. Again, I did a half on 36 hours notice.
Yeah.
My very first one. So, if some weird freak like me can pull it off, I figure we should be fine.
Halves are fun. Yeah.
How did you feel when the book was, A, when the book was out of your hands, and B, when you got copies? What did it feel like? And compare it to child rearing.
Oh, it's so different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much less precious. There's such, I mean, for me, and again, this is,
This is new you.
No, I think this is always me.
Yeah.
I'm not someone, I won't be like, oh, I love that story I wrote. Oh, I love that book. That's just not, I'm not someone who, so a story might be done. Or, as far as I can get it, and it feels done. It feels to a place where okay, I think I have something. And that's where it lands at, And I actually think that it's, for me at least, I can't speak for all writers, but for me at least, if I'm in love with something that I wrote, I think that's a big flag. And that probably means that I haven't gone closely, remotely as far as I need to go with the piece.
I'm like that with relationships too.
Right? I mean, so and so for me, when I'm done with the, and then, there's such a level of distance.
Yeah.
So I don't feel, once you're done and it's out there, it's really not yours anymore. Yeah. And so it's for whoever is going to pick it up and hopefully have their own experience with it, which obviously you can't control or steer. And you hope that you left enough room for the reader to enter, and you hope that you planted enough of your own seeds of intentionality that they are stitching something together, but they're having their completely different experience, and it's just completely separate from you. And so I'd say the hardest, the place that it feels most vulnerable is sort of in that querying stage, where again,
it's being judged in some way or another.
Yeah. And this is where all those feelings of not being good enough and the gatekeepers and all that stuff encroaches. But once it's
in the world,
I feel a great amount of distance from my work.
Last question.
Yes.
Who are you reading?
Who am I reading right now?
Yeah.
Well, right now I'm about to go up to Vermont and help celebrate Peter Orner's collection, his new memoir. Have you read Peter Orner?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so I think you should rectify that.
Yeah.
And I hate to say shoulds, but knowing your reading sensibility, he's probably one of my absolute favorite living writers, if not most favorite living writer right now. He's a story writer, he's a novelist, but he's put out now 2 memoirs, and but they're not your typical memoirs. They're sort of these fragmented memoirs that are actually really deep engagements with text, with other books. And so the only downside to that is that now my reading list has grown, reading him, it's oh shit, now I gotta go. So, but I'm on the subway coming over here. I was rereading his memoir, which I already enjoyed immensely, because I'm going to be doing a review of it in tandem with the writer Robert Lopez's memoir, Dispatches from Puerto Nowhere, as well, who is also a wonderful story writer who is putting out his first book of nonfiction that's coming out on $2 Radio in March. So I think I'm going to do a review that sort of weaves the two of them because they both have sort of overlapping thematic territory. So I'm doing that, and I am really far behind in who I'm reading. I'm reading Michael Pollan right now on audio. I have a TBR list really, really high. My next on my list is I want to read this book called Oreo by Fran Ross. Have you read it?
No.
So that's on my list.
Now Letters to Gwen John by Celia Paul.
Now I have Celia Paul, which I'm very excited about. I am right now in the throes of putting together this anthology, so I am reading a ton of submissions from writers that we've solicited for this project, and
which I completely forgot to ask about.
Oh,
tell me about the project.
It's okay. So I'm working on this this anthology called Smashing the Tablets, Radical Retellings of the Hebrew Bible, and we have this incredible, diverse cast of fiction writers who are putting stories together for us. And it's a really exciting project. But that has to be submitted to SUNY Press in June. So it's a fair amount of editing, and we have to write the introduction for that. And then between that and, I know what else I'm reading. Well, I haven't started it yet, but I'm about to read Courtney Sender, another writer who you might be interested in. Courtney Sender, and I'm not even going to tell you her title because her title is very long and I'm going to get it wrong. But wonderful short story writer, has her first collection of short stories coming out, I think in February or March. And I'm about to read that in an interview that I'm going to do for, I think, Lilith magazine.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And book you foist off on people? Last thing you read that you said, holy shit, you need to read this.
Oh, I do that with Peter Orner all the time.
Okay, I was going to say, it sounded like Peter Orner was going to be, the way you were describing him, it's probably going to be his. So.
No, but I will do that. There's another opportunity to hype this. So I'm on a crusade right now. It's funny that you should ask. I'm on a crusade. Speaking of gatekeepers, speaking of publishing, there's a wonderful writer named Deborah Shapiro who traditionally published her first 2 novels, and she is also a Chicago writer. I've never met her. I have no connection to her whatsoever, except I am now completely obsessed with her writing. She has a novel called Consolation that she self-published because perhaps it was too quiet for the traditional what have you. It is so gorgeous and so moving, and it reminds me a little bit of Michael Cunningham's The Hours. I mean, the prose is so lush. It follows through 3 generations of women surrounding this event of grief. I won't get into it too much, but the point is that reading her work I felt like, wow, this book could win the Pulitzer in a heartbeat. And yet, it's self-published. And so in terms of publicity and getting it out there, so any opportunity I can to hype that book, everyone should read Consolation by Deborah Shapiro.
Awesome. It will be closer than 9 years. We're going to get together sometime sooner than that, maybe for this anthology, maybe for some other reason, maybe to read about whatever the hell I end up writing down the line. But Sarah, thanks so much for coming back on.
Thank you so much. Or maybe I'll see you in short shorts on the trail.
There is that. That's always a possibility, a scary one, but a possibility. But
thanks so much for taking the time. This was so much fun.
And that was Sara Lippmann. Her new book is Lech from Tortoise Books. Like I said at the top, I enjoyed it an awful lot, and I hope we get across, that I did in the intro and we did over the course of the conversation, what's so special about this book. The characters, the setting, the sheer craft of the prose, it's just a delight. So Lech, now out at better bookstores, and go give it a read. Now, Sarah's site is saralippmann.com, which is Saralippmann.com. And that has links to her books, her editorial services, workshops, all sorts of publications she's been in and written. And then you can also find her on Twitter at Sara Lippmann, all one word, spelled the same way, and on Instagram as sarah.lipp, which is Lipp. I'll have links to all of that in the show and episode notes for this one. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories podcast by telling other people about it. just let them know there's this guy out there doing this neat conversation podcast with writers and artists and all sorts of people every week, and that they should go listen to it too. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by email, by postcard. I love postcards. By sending me a letter, by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you go over that, just call back, leave the rest of your message, and let me know if it would be cool to use your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with the listeners, but I would never run something like that without the speaker's approval or permission. So let me know. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. I did just launch a Substack. It's vmspod.substack.com. That's going to be a free email plus a paid tier with some bonus stuff in it. Once I really get that up and running, I'll kind of promote that more. But in the meantime, really, you should be giving your money to people or institutions in need. And you can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, and other crowdfunding platforms like that. And if you're looking for somewhere to start with institutions or foundations, I give to my local food bank every month, give to the Freedom Funds, the Poor People's Campaign, targeted election funds, pro-choice and women's choice funds. There's all sorts of things you can do to help build a better world. So, I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.